Good morning. Welcome.
All right, thank you, Jarek, for inviting me to kind of be facilitating a webinar, or really kind of being speaking and answering questions, responding to questions and comments. I'm Brian Beatty, and I'm at San Francisco State University. I'm a professor in the College of Education. Actually, it's a graduate college of education. I teach in a master's program in Instructional Design and Technology, and I also teach professional development courses and I'm preparing to teach my very first undergraduate course next semester, uh, uh, because we need the enrollment in our department to allow our smaller graduate courses to be less under the gun. So anyway, I have a lot of teaching experience. I was a high school teacher before I came to higher education. I've been here since 2003. And about 2005, I needed an idea that would allow us to combine our regular traditional face-to-face program, which had been around for 25 years, and bring in online students so we could and bolster our enrollment. Enrollment is always, kind of an issue, especially for smaller colleges or smaller programs like ours. And so that's where the first idea of HyFlex came up. Our department chair had thought we could just flip our program to an online program. I thought that's not a good idea. We don't teach online. Our students don't learn online. They won't come to an online program, which is interesting. 20 years later, it's almost a difference. So they allowed us to do this. And after a year, I found it was working well enough. In one course, I started teaching all my classes this way and started talking about it at conferences and helping other people who wanted to do the same thing. I came up with the word HyFlex because I needed a name for it that someone would recognize, hey, this is different because it's not just a hybrid approach. We're going to take classes and bring online students, face-to-face students together and give students the choice to be online or face-to-face rather than controlling where they're going to be coming from. And so for many places, many programs, this actually makes sense for a lot of applications. Doesn't make sense in every application, clearly. So I just want to make sure that's clear. And so today I'm going to talk about real briefly, what is that, just to make sure we're all on the same page on that. When I say the word HyFlex, what do I mean? And then we'll talk about assessment in HyFlex and some of the major challenges and how we're using generative AI. In particular, generative AI is what I've been playing around with and implementing with my students for their own assessment, as well as looking at using AI to help us make assessment plans, right? These tools are helpful at lots of different levels for what we're doing in our professional lives in general, but in education, I think in particular. So that's kind of the way this is going to work. And I'm going to share some really simple slides that it's a PDF file, but I'll also be bouncing back and forth to my ChatGPT account so that I can show you some of the things that I'm talking about. All right. If you do have questions and it's a good time for it, you can put it somewhere. I'm not going to be watching the chat. It's too distracting for me. It's hard enough when I'm teaching to watch the chat too. So someone else is going to watch that. So, but I'm happy to be interrupted with a relevant question or comment at any time. All right. So I'm going to share my browser then, and we'll see if we can get this to go. Oh, yeah. So this is one last thing I'll say. In 2019, I wrote a book on HyFlex. I'd wanted to do it in 2012. I took on a role as a senior administrator here. Didn't have time for a book. Came back to teaching in 2020. And I thought, oh, no one's written this book yet. I can still write it. So I wrote this book called Hybrid Flexible Course Design. Made it OER, made it available through edtechbooks.org. And that kind of launched the kind of awareness of what HyFlex is just in time for spring of 2020. Within like 6 months, the book had like 250,000 reads online because it was the moment. It was the time we needed to be able to do this kind of thing on a broad scale, at least for a period. 2021, I worked with some colleagues and launched a HyFlex learning community. So HyFlex learning community, hyflexlearning.org is a place where we run our own webinars and our newsletter and our blogs and things like that through there. So these are all resources. I just want to make sure I don't forget to let you know there's a lot more out here. And I know I'm sure some of your institutions are doing this and may even be part of this network already. All right. So that said, HyFlex assessment and generative AI, that's kind of the title that I've kind of chosen for this today. And real quickly, what is HyFlex? I said this before, but it's hybrid and flexible. It's just a portmanteau, right? Of bringing together parts of the words. It's a mix of face-to-face, asynchronous, and synchronous online activities. The way I teach it typically has all three modes. At least all those three modes are offered. That doesn't mean I always have students in all three modes. Okay, but I give them those choices. There are some people who say, look, I'm going to start with face-to-face and synchronous. I don't have the time to build an asynchronous path through my course. And on our campus, that's okay. We give faculty control over which online mode or modes they choose. But we also, if you're going to be HyFlex, you have to have a face-to-face scheduled session as well. And then flexible, learners get to choose. There are some limitations on choice though in some places, right? So you've got students who can't be in all online courses. Sometimes we have some controls, say, for a particular set of population of students. This course you have to take face-to-face because you already have one or two online courses and you're limited to a certain number for whatever reason it might be. So administrative controls are sometimes put in place for this. Yeah, so that's the thing. So what's different about this? Well, clearly the combination had been done for years. When I was a grad student doing my dissertation, I sat in on some courses that had remote students, online synchronous, and face-to-face students. This was through video teleconferencing in those days, but essentially it was the same thing. The difference was those remote students were never going to come to campus. They were remote because they were remote, hundreds, if not maybe 1,000 or 2,000 miles away. Different situation when there's no ability to make that move because it's a different experience for students making that choice, knowing they have that choice. And so most of the students who are in our HyFlex course are still regional to our campus within 60 to 100 miles, usually a lot closer, but not everyone. All right. And even within that model, that doesn't mean everybody has a legitimate choice to come face to face because they might have, transportation issues, time issues, whatever it might be. But the flexibility is there for those who are able to take a part of it. This is how we define it on our campus. If your institution is doing this, you probably have a definition that you're using. If you don't have a definition, you probably need one. On our campus, it's interesting. We have this formal definition, and we have this in our registration codes, et cetera. And yet more classes are doing HyFlex off book than are doing HyFlex by the book, I've found, just through conversations with faculty and students. Basically, the faculty are listing classes that are typically face-to-face, but students are asking for flexibility, and some faculty are able to give it to them, even if it's not officially kind of like been certified through the registration department. Interesting challenge. It's an administrative challenge, but it also kind of speaks to some of the flexibilities faculty are willing to give, even when sometimes administratively we don't want to do that. So our definitions changed several times over the years, and so it's something that's been kind of dynamic. What are we trying to do? We want to give students high quality learning access, right? We want access, high quality, equitable. In other words, we're meeting the same outcomes, the overall outcomes. And of course, we still, want to make sure that they feel like they belong in these courses. So equity, inclusion, belonging is still terms that we use. Because we don't want students who are in one of these modes, like the asynchronous online mode, to feel like they are a second class or a third class participant in the class. They can't be ignored. They can't feel ignored. They have to be just as well served with engaged and interactive information, as well as, and it's the teaching, facilitating the content acquisition, as well as assessment and all the levels of assessment that we know we do. So what do? Typically, when we're designing these courses, we start with what we have, and most of the faculty I've worked with over the years have started with a face-to-face course. Some faculty already teach a face-to-face course and an online asynchronous course. Perfect setup for HyFlex because now you just have to find ways to combine them to have students in different modes interact with them and then find ways to list them appropriately in your registration system so people know they have the flexibility. So we're building content. We're talking about assessment approaches. Then we're talking about engagement strategies across the board. And then implementation factors is really those four key principles of design. And then there is a fifth component that I always will talk about if people are asking me for the whole process, and that's evaluating the impact of what we're doing. What are we meeting those initial outcomes for the participation path, variation we're doing, for the reason for doing HyFlex in the beginning? Are we meeting that outcome? So how do we do that? Part of that is making sure students are learning, right? So the assessment of learning is really important. It's easy to grab data at a high level, grade data. How are students' grades in this course compared to a different course or the same course that was done single mode before? But that grade data, it's important, but it doesn't tell you much about the learning, right? It tells you about the grading, but we know there's a lot that goes into that is not directly associated with learning. My classes, 30% of the grade is typically, are you participating effectively? And effectively means you're following the learning process that I've laid out through all the activities. You're participating in activities, et cetera. I believe that certainly has a contribution to their overall learning, but it doesn't show up in a direct measurement of what they've learned. I feel like the quality of what they're able to produce in the things that are assessing their learning is better if they're participating fully. But and also it's a mode it is a behaviorist approach towards giving them some rewards for participating in the activities that I, the designer and the facilitator, have set up for them. They get points for all this. Even my grad students. If I didn't give them points for like active participation in discussions, my participation level, which is actually pretty high, I believe, would probably cut in half because that's what it was before. When I rolled in these systems that would give them some simple rewards, points that counted towards their grades, not a whole lot, but a little bit, basically doubled their participation in activities that I wasn't directly controlling in a synchronous session. So it's interesting. Um, the things that we have to kind of go through to do this, because when you shift from a single mode class into a hybrid mode where you've got multiple modes, there are going to be changes to all the modes, even the mode you've got near and dear to your heart because you've taught this way for 10 years. You will find, I've never seen anyone who never changes that as well, because they find that as they're starting thinking about engagement and assessment and interaction differently for that new mode, typically online, that reflects back onto what they're doing in person or in the synchronous space. And they think they walk in and say, well, I've got that wired. It's good. But now there's going to be this need to interact, to get students on who are asynchronous online in that path to interact with the students in the face-to-face or synchronous modes. So when you do that, you naturally change the experience for the synchronous mode students as well. Because now they're interacting with online asynchronous students they never see, in a Zoom box or in the classroom with them. They see them online now in these activities, and that's different. Okay, so that's a significant change. These are the kind of the four key design principles that we try to carry forward in all the different elements that we're doing. We're making sure that there's learner choice among legitimate alternatives. Okay, and that's really around participation path, but then that becomes participations in various activities that are key towards reaching the learning objectives for a particular lesson, but also the outcomes overall for the course. If I'm doing a substantial discussion in live time, right, in the synchronous space, I need to be, and that's going to be contributing to them achieving a learning objective for that lesson. That has to also then be reflected in something that the asynchronous participants can be part of. And even better, if I can have them doing that together in some way, even though the timing might be different. What if they're sharing the same discussion space? And maybe there's some overlapping, cycle of synchronous and asynchronous and synchronous and asynchronous. Anyway, lots of creative ways to do this. Equivalence is really clearly has to be done. And I've really focused on this has got to be the outcomes themselves. You got to have the same outcomes. This is part of the strategic review of whether or not your course is a good fit for HyFlex or whether it needs to be adapted if you're kind of feeling forced into HyFlex for some reason. Maybe it's a program change that someone is, encouraging you to be part of. There are some classes where we don't do everything HyFlex. We have a lot of STEM classes that have a lecture and lab component, and on our campus, most, if not all the labs I know of in the STEM field are still done face-to-face, which limits our ability to market those courses in that program outside of people who can be here for face-to-face labs. But that's a decision that the faculty and the administration of those programs have made. And so they do HyFlex for the lecture component because there's typically the lecture is in a lecture hall of 150 people or whatever, even 45 people. And there's no good reason why students can't meet the outcomes for attending a lecture online, even through a recording. But then they are in person for the labs. There are other places that will do online simulated labs or online labs, or another thing that we've done is we've dabbled with rescheduling labs. So when students have a challenge and can't be part of a lab Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, whenever, typically faculty like to teach, maybe there's a Saturday option, maybe there's a weekend option or evening option or some other alternative for them. But anyway, the idea is the same learning outcomes. We try to reuse things. And so when we're designing things for one mode, we always think, okay, is this also going to be a good fit for the students who are participating in a different mode? And that's often true. We can often do that. We can't always do that though. And that has to be okay. Because there are some things I will do in a classroom environment that I don't have a way to do this online. That doesn't mean I don't do it in classroom. That means I come up with some other way that the students can reach the same outcome or the objective in the online space. If it's a direct learning outcome, sometimes I just do that for participation and engagement. Go ahead, Enrique. I see your hand up.
And that was the kind of like the key, what I was thinking, how do you ensure that the learning outcomes are equivalent across from face to face to synchronous to asynchronous? And you were talking about it, so I was like, wait a minute, how do you grasp that concept, focusing on that the learning outcomes are equivalent.
Yeah, well, the place we start that, thank you for the question, great question, is that we write the learning outcomes. And we specifically say wherever we write them, these are for all modes. And that so then what that means is that now this is the goal for the design. So now the design has to be made so that it helps students reach those outcomes. What we don't do is say it's got to be the same experience, because it cannot be the same experience. If you're participating in a classroom compared to participating even synchronously online, there's a significant difference there in the experience. There's even a bigger difference when you're choosing to go to the asynchronous path. That difference between asynchronous and synchronous is huge. It's probably bigger than the difference between in-person and online synchronous, in my opinion. But we can't say to students, you're going to have the same experience. It's going to be just as good. It's going to be hopefully just as good to your learning, but it's going to be different. And so you have to know when you're making this choice, if you have a choice that you can make, what are the consequences of that choice as far as the experience? So we have some students who love learning online asynchronously. They do not necessarily want a lot of dialogue while they're learning. They don't feel like they have to, shape the conversation as we go through this. They just want to know, what do I have to do? When do I have to do it by? Give me the resources and I can do that. They're typically good, what we call have a high level of learner autonomy. They can learn well on their own. We have a lot of students also who do not have a high level of learner autonomy. They are better suited for a more of a synchronous environment where they can ask questions and get questions answered. They can listen to live dialogue and they have a chance to jump in if they want to. And they can have an opportunity to shift really the immediate content of what's going on by their questions, by their responses, and by their participation. So we have students with low levels of learner autonomy. The student who likes to ask questions, even though you just explained something and they have a question about it, and they're going to ask you, essentially you end up restating part of what you said before, but this is how they learn. This is how they like to have, they shape their experience. They can't do that asynchronously. If they try to do that asynchronously, totally frustrated. They post that question the third time. It's like, oh my gosh, I need an FAQ about this for that particular student. So different experiences leading to the same equivalent learning outcomes, which is the design challenge. All right. Of course, accessibility is a big thing, and I'll show you. I will show you one of my courses so you can see kind of how I do that. But it really has to come down to who's building the course, who's designing those activities, and how do we make that work together. The more we can reuse activities, the more likely we are to have very similar experiences, and sometimes we do give them the same exact experiences when we shift modes from one to the other. For example, when I do when I have students working on a topic I do week by week topics like a lot of classes. I always have students, part of their assignments are to participate in an online asynchronous discussion that kind of kicks off after the synchronous session we do once a week. Everybody does that the same way. They're all doing it like out of class. So by giving them that kind of activity, essentially what I'm doing is taking a discussion that might have happened in class, changing it in a way that makes more sense to do it out of class and having everybody do that. So the learning that's happening through that online discussion is not only are the equivalent objectives for that discussion, but there is also an equal experience because they're all doing it the same. Now, a long time ago, that might not have been okay. If you had face-to-face students and you told them to do some online activity after class, you might have had a rebellion. What do you mean? I'm here for 3 hours a week. Teach me now. Don't make me do this. That doesn't happen anymore. At least I don't think it does. It doesn't happen to me anymore, at least, because students are used to that. We've kind of grown into that ability to say, okay, prepare for class. Either you have, physical materials, you've got online materials, prepare for class, and then do some follow-up afterwards. I think gone are the days when it's only a face-to-face experience or only a synchronous experience for education. Training might be different, right? But education we typically practice that quite a bit. And the accessibility is not just the materials accessibility and the systems, the technology accessibility, but it's also access to technology, access to the network resources that students need. So this is sort of the kind of the complexity of what we're trying to do. Much of what we do in our regular programs is already setting us up to do this well. The real challenge, I think, comes in for faculty designing courses where you've got multiple modes and finding the kind of the equivalent nature of this. And the other thing we're looking for is, well, we don't want one path to be perceived or be really super, super easy, super simple. Like, okay, just read this. Just watch the recording, check off that you've watched it or the logs that you watched it, boom, you're done. That kind of thing will tend to have many students gravitate towards the simplest path, and then you have real honest questions about, their learning. Not necessarily always, but in general, that's kind of what I've seen. How we design this differently then? Typically, we're starting with what we're most comfortable with. If you're starting with a face-to-face course, you've got classroom instruction that we would hope works in all these ways. You've got outcomes that are stated, and students are meeting those outcomes. The content is there. It's sufficient. You may have some additional content that you find ways to provide for them. Assessing learning, you've got valid ways of assessing learning. That's the assumption, of course. And then, of course, you're doing engaged teaching. Also an assumption, but it's often very true, right? So then what we would do then say, okay, well, now which modes of online are we bringing in? If we're going to do online synchronous instruction, okay, what's the difference between online synchronous instruction and classroom instruction? It's technology mediated, right? Everyone's in a little box, right? You have to be more intentional about drawing them into the conversations if that's what you want to do to get them to engage. But we know ways to do that. And so we have to find ways to kind of design that in and include a space for the synchronous people to be part of the conversation without destroying, the classroom experience for those who are choosing to be there. Otherwise, because if they get that clue, oh, only the synchronous people matter. People who care about learning are probably just going to move synchronous because that's where they get the most attention. So there are ways to do that, right? And that's part of a skill set that has to be developed. And hopefully we've got some faculty development, resources that'll help us do that. And then we go to the asynchronous online. We know how to teach and build good online courses. All of your institutions do this to some level, right? We also know that not every online course is taught very effectively. And they're not always built very effectively. You can have a course that passes, high quality certification, Quality Matters, or whatever system you have there, that may actually not lead to effective learning for some students because of the design factors involved. And so it's not just did you pass the certification, important, but not sufficient in some cases. And so that's an important part of the design. How do we do that, right? And so this is where what I always tell people as well. So you're having trouble. Let's say you're doing a sociology class. You want to have a particular activity done, and you're not sure it can be done online. I first would say, well, what about your colleagues? Does anybody already doing this? Or an art class? Can you do an art class in HyFlex? Well, is anyone doing an online art class that actually works? If they are, then there are probably approaches they're using that you could also use, or that might work for you. At least something to look at. I used to get questions like, well, can you do an engineering class this way? You know, what about a science class? It just doesn't make sense. No, there's no way you could do this. And actually, there are ways you can do that. And the way you find out is by looking at what people are already doing and talking to them about what has worked, learn from the lessons they learned along the way, and then find ways to do, maybe start with similar to what they're doing, and then you make it your own. That doesn't make it always easy. It's rarely easy, but there are ways to make it happen in most cases. Right. So what's the role of generative AI then in HyFlex learning? This is where I've kind of landed in the last 2 years. First of all, I started using generative AI in my HyFlex teaching and the design is saying, I need help engaging students, especially those who are online asynchronously, who don't necessarily want to be that way, or they don't have good interaction habits online asynchronously. Maybe they want to be there, so it's not like it's an accident they're online. They're choosing to be in the online path, but maybe they are choosing it because they feel like they can be less engaged. And so I want something that will help with that. And so I started building these engagement-focused generative AI tools for them to use. Like what are they missing in the online asynchronous space that they wouldn't get in the synchronous space? Well, they're not going to get the conversation with other students, right? And typically, most of the conversation I have in synchronous classes, even small ones, happens in breakouts. They don't talk a lot to me in the larger sessions that we're having. There's more of a listening for them. And it's one or two students maybe participating substantially. So we do breakouts. Or we have them answer polling questions or things like that. Can we do that with generative AI? How about as a study partner, right? So we do peer review in our major assignments that we do. And so we have a GPT that does online peer review with students whenever they want it. Because peer review, when I do it we use Canvas, so using that system, a formal peer review for like a project assignment or a paper assignment gets kicked off at a particular time. Students have a particular window of time to do the peer review, and it's often a week long. And even though you might tell students, the sooner you give this, the more valuable it will be to the person that you're reviewing, sometimes it takes them 5 or 6 days to do peer review. Well, that student who's doing that, draft and final version of a paper might need that feedback right away. So can we have a tool that gives them feedback right away? That is kind of key to the rubric, key to the assignment, uses some practice, has been trained a little bit in that way. You can do that with a custom GPT. And then of course, there are others. And here's the other thing. Yeah, as I was thinking about these for asynchronous online learners, I was realizing, look, almost all of my students are doing most of their learning out of class, even the ones in person, but the ones in the synchronous space. Those who are really engaged in the learning process are spending time out of class doing this. And so these tools designed for asynchronous participants will obviously help all the students. This is a set. This is most of the ones I've built so far to build for custom support for learners. There's a syllabus explorer. I did that because I wanted them to use that before we met the first time. I wanted them to actually go through the syllabus and ask some questions and have questions asked to them. And I didn't want just a static syllabus quiz, 10 questions, 5 questions, whatever it is. Prove to me you read this before you come into the first class. This gives them an interaction, right? That's much better than a quiz. That might be part of it, but it will kind of coach them through the important things of the syllabus. There's a HyFlex mode chooser. This one is actually there more for faculty and administrators than it is for students, because I find that most students who are making choices about which participation mode they're going to take, almost all of them have a pretty good idea of what they're going to do before they even show up to class the first time, right? Yet there are a few students who would like some help making that choice. And so this helps them walk through the various participation options that that are available to them and some of the consequences of making that choice. So if you're going to choose to be in person, okay, all right, this is what that means. You got to be on campus on time, blah, blah, blah. Or more likely, if you're going to be an asynchronous learner, it'll ask them like, do you have experience learning that way? Have you feel like you're successful? Here's the kind of things that help make you successful that way, et cetera, et cetera. My learning helper, simple GenAI tutor, everybody's got one of those. There's lots of those out there. And so good tutoring ones will make sure that students are being walked through a learning and kind of a discovery process, not necessarily just being told, oh yeah, here's the summary of that, and here's what else do you want to summarize? Those kinds of things. Quiz Me is one that I made for self-assessment. Actually, I made it for initially. This was designed to replace an LMS readings quiz. Where you give them something to read and prepare, and then you have them do this, and somehow they can report it out so ahead of time before the live session they've actually got some preparation done. Enrique.
I'm sorry to bother you, but are you going to be showing us step by step on how to design the custom GPTs, or just
I can show you. Yeah, I can show
because it
you
would
how.
be nice to kind of capture the what you're
Yeah,
describing. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I'm just doing a little talk through this, and
Thank
then
you.
we'll dive into one or two of these in detail. And when I do that, I'll show you behind the scenes. This is how it's built. This is what it looks like, and then here's how it's built. And then it's simpler than you might think, but you still have to have a plan to start out. So Quiz Me, students use this now for it's a study tool. They use it like a tutor helper on their own. I give them a link to it. And then my intention was to actually require them to use this a couple of times during the semester to try it out as a readings quiz generator, because it gives them a unique quiz every time based on the content that's uploaded. And I can prepare that with preloaded content too. Breakout Companion and Breakout for Three. These are two tools that are designed for simulating a classroom breakout session. The Breakout Companion was first. Worked pretty well, but I realized, we don't usually do two people breakouts, not in my classes. We usually do 3 or 4. So can I get the AI tool to have 2 personas and then to have the student interact as the third persona of a triplet and have a conversation that way? That works pretty well. It's not perfect. The AI hasn't really built up for me to do that, but it's working okay. Peer review partner, like I mentioned before, is for peer review for assignments. And so these are all available in the GPT store. We also, as a caveat, our students recently got access to a openai.edu database, or not database, a protected data environment we have an agreement with OpenAI for like another year. And so the challenge with that, the good thing is they got a protected data space. And so I can require them to use these, although I do also tell them, look, if you absolutely do not want to use generative AI, I understand, here's an alternative for you. But most of them are much more willing to do that because it's a protected space. But I can't share those outside of the environment. And students can, in that environment, students who are logged in with their university credentials cannot use an external GPT on that. So I have two sets of these, one inside the firewall and one outside the firewall. And then I also did some for designing. And let's look at one of the ones for students facing first, and then hopefully I will have time to take a look at this one as well. So let me just get this out of the way. Okay, click OK. ChatGPT. So I just log in, and I have a Plus account, so I can create GPTs, and I don't have to keep the Plus account to to have the GPTs live in the GPT store. This is for OpenAI. Some similar arrangements for some other tools. I use OpenAI and ChatGPT just because it's where I started, and it seems to be pretty powerful. Yeah, so let's take a look at QuizMe. QuizMe on the assessment side could be used for a kind of a flexible assessment tool if you wanted to just get a sense of students are engaging in preparation and they're developing some understanding. And if it's not a hard set of, okay, they've got to be able to answer these 10 questions and only these 10 questions, then a tool like this might be helpful because it's going to generate a different set of questions than every time it's used, unless you pre-specify only give them these 10 questions, but you kind of lose some of the power of the AI tool because this allows students to do some exploration while they're doing the quiz. So this tool, I always give them a little button that says, what does this tool do? Just in case they want to know. So it'll tell them what it does. It'll do a traditional quiz. This is where it started. And then one of my grad students was doing this for their business they work for. And they said, well, we're going to do some scenario-based assessments. Oh, that sounds cool. So it also will do, I talked with them about the code they were using, and we put some more prompting into my tool. So it can also do a scenario-based assessment. And so it gives them a little scenario, of course, and ask them some questions. So what's the right answer here and why? So rationale. And so, and they can mix it up. And also, after using this with students a little bit, they said, Dr. Beatty, I know more about this than the tool thinks I do. And so can you have it ask me harder questions? I think, well, you could tell it yourself, but that's not the point of a custom GPTs. You don't want the learner to have to know how to flexibly move, work with generative AI. You want them to go in and click a button and have that experience. And so now it's to ask them, what level are you at? And do you want to upload a file, or do you want me to draw from my LLM data for all of this? And so that's what it will do. Now, how does this work? If I go into here, I can go into the edit mode. And if I go into the edit mode, on the left side, you see the configuration. The configuration is essentially how all of these are used by the system. So there's a name, there's a description. It all shows up over here on the right. There's an icon that either it'll create for you, or you can create your own. And then there's the instructions. And these instructions, let me see if I can blow this up a little bit. This is the prompt essentially that goes in here. One of the reasons I decided to do a custom GPT, rather than just giving students like a database of prompts they could use for various things, is because this doesn't require them to cut and paste into this at all. All right, so it doesn't give them flexibility to use this prompt in other tools because they don't see the prompt, right? So that would be that's the trade-off between giving them a long prompt to use for a complex interaction, or a custom GPT, which is a one-button push. And so this is essentially what it's doing. You can see the simple instructions here, not that difficult to do. And then what I also find with these is if I found a good way to do something in one tool, I can quickly add that component, that feature into the other tools just by copying and pasting. I don't know the limit on how long this be. I do know that the more complicated you make this prompt, the less likely it is to operate exactly like you expect it to. I've learned that in the breakout for 3, because sometimes it'll start processing the input and giving output, even though it's not necessarily done with all the things you asked it to do. And then you actually put in these conversation starters, right? And then you can upload files. This one does not have any files uploaded. There was a time I had uploaded a couple of files for a little while that were essentially how to write a good quiz. And then I realized, actually, when I'm just using the AI tools, it's already doing this. And so I didn't feel like I had to keep adding those files in here. And once you add them into the baseline GPT, they're there. No one else can take them away. Now, they could tell the GPT to ignore those files, and maybe it would. And then the various components. So this is one way. So this is what you end up with. But where you start typically is on the create side. And on the create side, it acts more like a GPT building wizard. It says, okay, Well, here, maybe so basically it's going to go through those kind of questions, but let's take this. Let's say we're going to do a fresh one. So I click on GPTs, and then I can see the little create button up here. Now it's going to ask me, how do you want to do this? Do you know what you want? Now, if you've already got a really, really well-planned GPT out there, you might have stuff that you can just copy and paste into here. But normally what I've done is I've gone to the create side. And on the create side, it's going to say, what would you like to make? And then I tell it what I want to make. And then you just type that in here. I was doing this in a live workshop 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. And within 15 minutes, one of the professors in social work, volunteered her situation. She wanted students to be able to work on, have an example that they could explain of the 5-factor model for something, dealing with an issue, whatever it might be. Let's say, I don't know, let's say smoking, stopping smoking. And so we were able just to walk through a couple of questions with her, type some things in here, and it will build as we go. And then we have a chance to try it out, see how it works, and then make some immediate revisions to it. So we did like 2 or 3 cycles of revisions. And within 15 minutes from start to finish, we had a GPT that she thought was good enough that she could actually try it out with some students, and then refine it further for whatever she wanted to do. So that's all you have to do. So I don't know, we could, what would we want to do? Let's see. What do I want a GPT to do? How about students figure out if they know enough about a topic to move on? That's really general. It probably is going to ask me, that's really general. So it's going to start building that into the prompt down here, and it's going to ask me then more questions. Okay, here's a suggested name. You can make this name. You can make it some other one. Topic readiness coach. Well, what a creative what a creative title. Yeah. Let's how about am I ready? Let's just use that one, whatever it might be. And so then it's suggested some of these feeder questions on the right, not ones I would use probably. It's going to give us a picture. So it's kind of going through its own process. And then after it gets through this really basic, okay, let's frame this out a little bit. It's going to start asking, what do you want this to do? And what do you want to make sure it does? What do you want to make sure it doesn't do? I have some colleagues in the writing world in like first year comp classes, and they're building custom GPTs that are helping to structure the interaction with generative AI for students in the early writing process so that it walks them through the writing process as they would want them to follow without having it write anything for students. So the GPT will not write anything for students. It will not draft content for them at all, but it will walk them through the various stages of developing content. Okay, so then I say, okay. And then it's going to start getting into the guts of what we're trying to do. And then once we're ready to try it, we just say create. It gives us gives us the opportunity then to try it out. So this is where you would then refine what this GPT should do. I'm not going to go through this because I don't want to take all of our time doing it, but that's essentially all you have to do. Yeah, so that is how simple it is to start. Because if I hit create, it might tell me that we're not ready for this, but then I decide who gets to see it. GPT store means anybody in the store, anyone with the link, or only me. If I was trying something out, and I didn't want it to be exposed anywhere, I'd probably do one of the first two. GPT store makes it available for anyone searching for the topic or your name. And there it is. Now that's like super simple. I don't know exactly what it's going to do, but that's all it takes to create a really rudimentary one. So if I can review it, and then it's going to give me the opportunity to try it out. And while I'm trying it out, it'll ask me, is this working the way you want it to? Do you want to try it? Do you want to make any changes, etc.? So it's that simple. Okay. And I told it I wanted to try it out. Yeah. So now it's going to say, okay, photosynthesis. That was one of the questions they put in there. So, and then it'll walk them through that. Okay. So, all right, okay, let's do this. Let me go back over here. So with student-facing GPTs, they're really designed, in my world, they're designed primarily to engage them in something relevant for the learning process. And for most of them, it ends up being a way that they can self-assess their learning either directly through using the tool or as one of the outcomes of using the tool is I get a better sense of how well I know this stuff, right? For the teacher, I haven't. Yeah, I think the like I mentioned earlier, when I do my grades for the class, it's like 30% is participating in the process and 70% is what you actually create. I think for my use of ChatGPT, it's a similar thing where what I'm doing is I'm asking them to use the tool for a particular reason, and I want them to show me the output from the tool. And that's not necessarily a 3-page, transcript. It's like most of the tools I build ask them if they want a summary, basically to report out, and then they get a little paragraph or two summary of the interaction, and that's what I typically want to see. And I'm not reading it to let them know you did this wrong, you did this right. I want to see that they've done this. And if they get to the point of creating the summary, I haven't really had anyone who turns something in that shows that you were just playing with the tool. In part because I write the instructions for the tools. It said, like if someone is just pulling you totally off topic, you ask them if they want to go off topic, in which basically end that conversation, or politely respond to their pulling you off topic, acknowledge their comment, but then bring them back into the stream of the topic that they're supposed to be talking about, that they told you they wanted to talk about. So I'm looking for that participation more than anything else. So it's a process assessment more than that. Clearly, students are using these tools on their own to develop their other assignments they might do, and we try to make sure in the classes I teach they're using generative AI, and I want them to acknowledge their use of AI. I let them know that having it right for you is not okay, but having it help you with brainstorming, refining some ideas, et cetera, that's perfectly good. And I show them I'm doing that as well, and try to help them see that there are legitimate ways to do this. I have had some students who have turned in GPT output as their paper to meet a deadline, and it was clear to me. It's like, I think you just ran out of time because you didn't even change the formatting here. That's not okay. Let's do this again. And so I would let them do it again. But if it became habitual, it'd be probably, it's like, are you sure you're ready for this? In support of design, one of the things that is a challenge, I think, for us when we're designing courses like HyFlex is having someone else to bounce ideas off of or to gather some ideas. I mean, many of you have taught online asynchronous courses. You probably have ways that work well for you in engaging students in online courses, but I think most of us still have this challenge of how do I get students to participate in those activities, especially things like a weekly discussion. Points will go a certain extent, but sometimes points, people just responding for points give you a certain level of response. That's not really what you're looking for. In most cases, you want them to be deeply engaged. And so there are different approaches you could use that other people have used over the last several decades to do online discussions. But do you have all that at your fingertips? Probably not. You can do some Google searching and you can get some good ideas there. You can go to the research databases and get some good ideas there. But the GPT tool can also help you kind of make that perhaps more efficient, perhaps a little more quickly. And so that's what these design tools are designed to do. And so these are the 6 stages of the design process I try to walk faculty through, or IDs. First, the strategic choice of HyFlex or not, and what version of HyFlex, and which modes would you use, under which conditions would it be used, those kinds of things. Content planning. This is usually easy for people to think of, but there's an interesting idea here that happens when we create more digital content and we start giving them tools to use to interact with that content. All of a sudden now the content becomes interactive in a way that it was never before. Give someone like a paper to read or a textbook to read. It's not typically designed as an interactive document, but now when they're interacting with it inside of a generative AI tool, wow, I could explore that topic more. I can get a definition of those terms over there. I can learn about the history of this over there if I care to, because the tool is going to help me. It's got this huge ocean of data that it can draw from that the textbook can't do. So content planning can be a lot more interesting and rich. I kind of have coded into here the appreciation that when students are generating content in the discussion, that often turns into learning content for other students. And so you've got peer developed content and you've got instructor developed content that is on the fly. When you're doing a synchronous space or even asynchronously responding in a discussion, you are creating new content that's never been created before, unless you're cutting and pasting responses, from what you've done before. So there's it kind of helps you kind of think about content a little fresher. Same thing for assessment. How are you assessing learning? equivalency between modes. What are your big challenges? It draws from some of the common answers to some of those questions. There seems to be kind of an inevitable push towards, if you don't like cheating on tests, get away from tests as much as you can, or change the way you're doing tests. I mean, I don't know. There's no good solution to not cheating on tests that works all the time, unless don't give tests, right? So that's not a helpful answer for some faculty. For some faculty, that's what they need to hear. Okay, well, maybe I can think about this differently. How do I do this for 50 students that isn't a multiple choice test? What can you do? There are some things you can do. I was talking to a faculty just yesterday, 1,000 students in a class. They kind of felt like they were bound to this multiple choice test. And so then the question is, okay, this seems to be a legitimate case where you have to use some sort of easy to score assessment that the system can assess quickly for your situation. So you're probably stuck into that kind of a test. But now the question is, well, how can you create multiple choice questions that actually get to different levels of learning and more complex questioning? So we were using this tool, looking at, well, how about different forms of quizzing? Could you create, like, I don't know much about this, but there's a type of a quiz called DOMC. You might be familiar with that, but it's a structured way of asking questions that's more complex than I have ever actually made for my own thing. But I'm thinking now of exploring that more, because that could be something that gives you a better sense of creating a legitimate experience for students that assesses learning much better than just, do you recognize the answer here? Or can you do a simple recall of the answer here? Because it has rationale involved in it, answers and why. Not only why is this the right answer, but why is this the wrong answer? Those kinds of things. Engagement, of course, are a huge problem, especially with online learning. All of the challenges we have with individual mode instruction, engagement, assessment, rigor across different types of assessment, that all comes into HyFlex. All right. HyFlex has its own challenges. Most of those are, I think, opportunity challenges, but all the problems that we get in individual modes, they come in as well. So you're going to have to be able to not struggle. You're going to have to find ways to solve that. And if you've got good solutions that work for like a single mode class, many of those will also work for HyFlex. Implementation, of course, is okay. So this is the idea. Think about things that are broader than just your class and your students and your content and your LMS site, et cetera. Right? What about, other systems that are involved, registration systems, advising systems, financial aid systems, and it doesn't go into detail on that unless you want to go into that, and you've got some resources you can give it, but it gets you to think about those other aspects. If you're going to be the first one in your school, or your programs be the first up to have a program level approach to this, those are important things to help figure out. And then impact evaluation, right? Why are you doing this in the first place? And how can you build into your courses activities that generate metrics that you can use to decide whether or not you're reaching the impact level you wanted to. Okay, so let's take a look at one of those. Let's take a look at the assessment one. I was just using this, and so it shows up for me. But here's the other thing. The HyFlex, what I've realized is that the HyFlex planning for assessment, it's there specifically. I put this into a workshop, so it's kind of titled specifically for HyFlex. It'll work for any kind of course though, because you can just tell it, hey, actually, my HyFlex course is just a face-to-face course, or it's just an online asynchronous course. Let's focus on that and say, oh, it'll be very happy to help you. Okay, how about that? So what's one of the major challenges you see with assessment in general, especially if you're thinking about assessment across modes? We've got the kind of the cheating one, which typically has a proctoring kind of solution, or radically change the test, make it an open book test solution, or stop doing test solutions. Three big ones there. The policing, the build it so it's okay for them to use all the resources, or don't even do that kind of assessment. There may be other answers to that, but those are the three big ones I know of. Any challenges out there? There's your opportunity. Get your question answered, maybe. It's like at a circus, right? You need a volunteer.
So with this ChatGPTs, how do you ensure that learning is taking place with the different modalities? Like
Okay.
in the words ensure, right?
How can I ensure learning Oops. Yeah. The other thing I also model for students is I don't have to type very well to use this tool. How can I ensure learning is happening equivalently, maybe across modes in my courses, my course? It's just a really general question. So let's see what the kind of the response is. Now, if I want to get more specifically, it can probably be a little more helpful. So this is okay. So it's got some source documents that are some of the stuff I wrote about HyFlex specifically. And I don't like the way it always, cites my name in here, but it does. So that's the way it is. How to ensure equivalent learning? Yeah, well, we have a learning outcome and we make sure it's across all roads and we find out ways that we can do it in each one. So what specifically would you be, Enrique, do you have like an outcome you would want to make sure we were able to measure effectively across all modes? That might be more specific.
Yeah. So you're you're measuring engagement, right?
Well, this is saying here's three things you can do. Make sure you're using that your assessments are lined up with learning outcomes. Okay, that's pretty basic stuff. That's important. So we have a single learning outcome. We want to make sure every mode has an assessment activity that aligns directly to that outcome. That is a good starting place, right? Now, one of the things that means is that the outcome itself cannot be like a process, can't have how do I do this as part of the outcome? Because how I do this is going to be differently, most likely, face-to-face, online synchronously, and online asynchronously. So it's got to focus really on the what. And so for sometimes our outcomes have process in there, like it's in a lab environment, or in a group of 4 students, those kinds of things. As that might have to change. And so that would be something that perhaps the tool would pull out for you. It's also talking about, okay, in general, authentic and flexible assessments, right? Kind of mentioned that it kind of drives towards authentic assessment, which a lot of our language in the assessment world often drives towards. Let's make it more authentic, make it more authentic. Flexible assessments, this is something that's an interesting one. And I think this is true across the board, but especially true in HyFlex is what you're going to need is you're probably going to need different ways to do that kind of assessment, give students options. And if you're going to do those options for students in various modes, and you can, why not give that option to students in a different mode? Here's an example. This week I was doing classes, and 2 of my classes, they were doing their first major assignment presentation. They create something and then they do a presentation about it in a synchronous live session online or in person, or if they're an asynchronous participant, they do a recording, like a 10-minute recording of them explaining their project. Well, what I realized a couple of years ago is that I had students coming to the synchronous session, and I'd always like push those students, okay, you're here live, do your live presentation. And people started saying, look, I have a recording of this. Is it okay if I just play the recording? Thought, you know what? This is not a class about doing a live presentation. It's part of what we do, but it's not learning how to do that. So I said, yeah, why not? Because for this particular student, it was a stressful thing to have to do a live presentation. And the timing is often an issue and other kinds of things. So now I tell them ahead of time, look, you can come to the live session and do your recorded presentation if you want, and then get live feedback, because the live feedback is typically more dynamic. It is more dynamic, and it's also the more back and forth than it is getting feedback in an asynchronous discussion as a reply to a post where you put your recording in there. So that's an example. Now I make it clear that you have options of how you want to do this. Just a simple thing about doing a presentation. So that's what this is really saying. It's like you're going to be doing this for different modes. Give them options. And by the way, those options might be good players in all the different modes. Formative self-assessment, this is another important thing, and it's designed to do this. And I think that this is where I do a lot of this. I try to support this quite a bit, which if it's self-assessment, that means it kind of puts a lot of agency and onus on the learner to use the activities, to do the activities, and then to make some judgments about how well they're learning, and then make perhaps some choices about where do they go from there. Do they go back and cycle through a process of activity again, or are they ready to move on, or do they ask for help, whatever it might be. I have students, one of the things I do with students is as part of me assessing the course overall and what's going on, is I have them do a reflective journal every week through a vehicle of an online discussion that it's not a discussion, but it's a discussion tool. So they post into that discussion tool every week. First week, they start a thread. And then every week after that, they reply to their own thread. Everybody can see all their posts, so they're public to the class. And I let them know that I'm the only person who has to read everything. You don't have to read anything except what you've written. And then I also don't expect anyone to interact here, but you can. It's open for you, the features available, but it's not designed as a discussion. This is designed for you to tell me essentially how you're learning in the class, not what you're learning, but how it's going. And I use this to pick up on, levels of stress, confusion about instructions, satisfaction or dissatisfaction with what's going on in the class, whatever it is. But when I make changes to my courses, it's usually because I've heard about it in a reflection forum. So that idea, though, gets them thinking about their learning. And students at all levels can do this pretty well if they choose to be part of it. So I give them points at the end of the semester. If they've done all their reflection forum posts, that's 10% of their grade, just participating in the process. And because they see everybody else's, if they're just writing 1 or 2 sentences, which is not really what I'm asking for, I'm really looking at the paragraph side, they see how little they're writing compared to everyone else. And for some of them, they kind of self-regulate that way and start saying more things about it. Designing for UDL, okay, makes a lot of sense. I think many of us have a lot of experience with that. Leveraging technology to close gaps, all right. Build in reuse across modes. This is one thing that I find to be helpful as much as I can is if I have an activity that they're doing, especially if there's a self-assessment or even if I'm assessing something, I try to do the same thing across modes if I can. If I use like a polling activity for engagement in a synchronous session, I will have that polling activity available for asynchronous learners to go through at their own pace afterwards. And then if we've done any commenting or debriefing on what we're doing in class, I have asynchronous students participate in that as well. So I'm assessing those things. I'm assessing their learning, but not giving them grades for it. They get kind of like points for participation. But it continues to build my sense of kind of where they're at and where the class is at. So for me in my classes, then for the measuring the actual outcomes that are written in the in the syllabus and all that, I rely on the formal assignments, which are papers, presentations, sometimes projects. Not tests. If I had tests, though, I would just build in the tests and incorporate that. Okay, so this was just the first question. And so you could dive into more of this if you want to. We're at the top of the hour. So, Derek, are there other questions we want to
Dr. Beatty, there were some questions in the chat. One question came about access. Do the school provides a special license through the school to have this type of access for Zoom?
Well,
Or
what we have right now is we have essentially, I think it's the same as the GPT plus access. So I pay $20 a month and I get a certain level of access, and that allows me to create inside the school's environment where everybody has at least that level of access on their account. So they log in with their name, their university credentials. They log in and they go into our GPT space, which looks exactly the same. It's just the data behind isn't being shared for the global model. And then they get a chance to use it just like I'm using it here. So they can build GPTs, they can share GPTs within, well, I don't know if they can share them with others. We have some certain lockdowns from academic technology that doesn't allow students to have free access, like free as in you can do whatever you want. They're sort of limited, but they can still build. I think they probably can't necessarily share them with everybody, though. I think they kind of have to be vetted to go into the university's GPT store.
thank you. Steve, you have a question?
Yeah, first of all, this is a fascinating presentation, and I'm really grateful for you sharing this, especially all the work that has certainly gone into those GTPs in the store. A question that I had, I actually posted it, but a question I had, how would you help faculty bridge between their current sort of understandings, experiences, perhaps apprehensions about using some of these technologies like AI and bridge them to where they feel comfortable? I looked at the quiz one, for example. Fantastic, just very simple checks of understanding, super powerful, but wondering about faculty.
Yeah, actually, I think a good place to start with faculty is to get them to use generative AI in general, but some of its tools like this that are designed to help them with what they need to do. And that's where the design tools I was talking about here, these are designed to help faculty on the design process. there's another, I've done some other tools that were designed. So for example, here's one. This is for another project I was working on. This allowed us as a group, as I'm working with some European universities on some HyFlex training infusing generative AI. But part of what we're trying to do is have a quiz in each with 9 modules. Everyone's building different modules, 9 modules. We want a quiz in each module. I said, well, why don't we, kind of, do it ourselves and use generative AI to create one quiz that actually works with all 9 modules. How would you do that? Well, so what we did is we built this tool, and here I'll ask the tool what it does. And essentially, we upload the module content for each training module. This is like it's like a 9 module workshop that faculty will go through. And it will say, here's what I'm going to do. We can do the traditional quiz or the scenario-based assessment. And I created this as essentially as an example for the project. If you want to use something like this, you'll have to build it yourself, right, in your own environment. But this is what it could do. And then it'll allow you to pick from your topics. And right now, I was part of building modules 1 and 8 of this in a draft. And so I just preloaded that content. But eventually, this would have all 9 modules in it. So,
yeah, scaffolded. Yeah, scaffolded.
Yeah, exactly. And so what would faculty see this as?
Yeah.
Wow, this is really a help. I don't have to build all those quizzes. Now I get kind of live generated in real time quizzes, and I can have them choose which module, and they could even choose multiple modules if they wanted to.
Yeah.
So what would that do? 1, it helps save time for them, right? And 2, it makes what they're doing probably even better or more effective or more efficient, however they would value that. And it allows them also to have more opportunity for exploration, even within the activity itself.
I saw that assessment planning one that you had. Just kind of took a quick look at it, but yeah, again, it's bridging scaffolding with some of the experience, but in a very purposeful, strategic way.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, it's just great. That's
Yeah.
really exciting.
One of the challenges of this approach, of course, is as the back end changes, right? As if this is done in ChatGPT, as whatever 6.0 or 6.0 comes out or whatever, it's going to require probably some adjustment. Well, probably, right? Would you say, or what if audio becomes a tool that can be used? What about video? This builds in imagery now as well, if you want to use that. The other tool I haven't really explored myself yet, but there is something that came out a while ago, several months ago at least. If I go to this, near at the bottom says create new action in the lower left. You can actually create. This takes some coding knowledge, but you can create an action. Let's see if I do that, and it will then allow the tool to get a certain point, and that there'll be a choice for the learner to make, and they can click a button and essentially says, do this. And well, it takes some output from here and feed it into another application in another place, which my mind was, well, what if I did this in my readings quiz? And it took that summary section that the code would know, which was the summary section, and dumped it into a Google form. And then before class, I could take a quick look at the Google form and scan through that, see where potential issues were, or, who did it, who didn't do it, those kinds of things, without having to have them copy and paste and put into a Google Doc or something like that. So, and there obviously there's a lot more complex things you can do with that. So the point is the back end is going to continue to evolve. And so that is, that's the nature of the technology. It's still relatively early, even though it feels like it's really capable. So really, back to your first question, I would get them using this in some way that helps their productivity or their professional work or whatever it might be, but something they can see personally valuable to them. And then that might be a way to get them to at least to optimize, oh, actually, this could be a useful tool.
Yeah.
Now, and also to realize your students are going to use generative AI anyway, most of them, at least many of them. Why not try to find a way to help kind of channel that in a particular direction that is more supportive of the learning process that you want to support? And that's one of the reasons I'm doing those.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. I have a question and followed by Jessica. Maria, go first.
Yeah, mine is actually more, maybe you were sort of referring to it with those extra actions. If we have a dedicated learning management system, how do we integrate these, these quizzes easily? Or is it more that they should generate questions and then you or a learning assistant helps you then configure, your learning management system, so it's all in one place.
Yeah, that's a good question, Maria. As a matter of fact, that's exactly how I thought I would use that GPT first was, yeah, I wanted to do readings quizzes. I thought, well, I can use ChatGPT to create the quiz for me, and then I can just have that created in a format I can export so that I can import it into Canvas, and boom, now it's a quiz in Canvas. And I realized, wait a minute, that gives me a static quiz in Canvas. Is that what I want? And for my purposes, that's not what I want. I thought, well, I could get a dynamic quiz if I just give them a link to the GPT. And so what I do when I want them to use it now, I'll put it into the LMS and it would just be a link, just like any other external link. Say, okay, use this to do this. And
then you
that
just fill in the grades. Yeah.
Yep. And then I would have them, yeah, right now I have a former student who helped me out to figure out that little action thing just real briefly. And she was able to relatively quickly build one that it clicks a button and it opens up a Google form entry box, and it says, basically ask them a question. And then they do that. That would be a Google form that opens up in their browser. And then it would report out to a common page. And so it's not difficult to do, but it is a couple of steps. Right. And especially if you're not a coder, then probably someone's going to have to help you. I found a lot of help from ChatGPT itself. So how do I do this? Okay, how do I do that? Oh, how do I do that? And then I gave it to my former grad student, who was gracious enough to actually interpret all that and put it together. So it can be done, but yeah.
Thank you. Jessica?
Yeah, this somewhat similar question to Maria there. So I was looking at your presentation, there was an area where you could check for Canvas. And so is for your My Chat, is it drawing from that information that you have in that LMS then? And if my college doesn't have that connection to GPT, or I just basically want to be able to use all the information I have in my Canvas course already. Yeah. So is that linked then through a plugin?
I don't think that means Canvas the way
Oh,
we talk about Canvas as
okay.
an LMS. I
Okay.
think that this means is that you can have it open up a window within the ChatGPT environment that allows you to see output, not the GPT output. Let's say you have it create a document.
Mm.
And it'll show you that and allow you to interact with that. And maybe Eddie has an answer for us.
I don't think it does. And I've tried using with Copilot and I haven't been able to link to Blackboard. I don't know about Canvas though.
Yeah, so I think that's a different use of the word canvas.
Oh, it's not what she referred. Oh, I thought it was the Canvas LL she's referring to.
Yeah, I don't know that that's the I don't know. I have that selected, but I don't know what it means. I could find out though, couldn't I?
Okay. So, but expanding upon what she's asking, it would be great if it could link into the LMS system, because then the marking could go automatically right through to the grading on the
Yeah.
LMS system.
I am sure that's going to happen. If the Canvas, I think the Canvas roadmap includes this generative AI whatever you call it, implementation that
Mhm.
Or
allows.
like through an LTI, like I was thinking H5P through an LTI or something.
Yeah.
Well, so here's I think that we're gonna see this sooner rather than later, is what about having your LMS allow you to use GenAI for, I don't know, discussion forum facilitation, other kinds of things.
Well, why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't it allow it? Many publishers are linked exactly as Steve said.
Exactly.
They're linked to it. So
Yeah.
it should
Yeah.
come next, probably, hopefully.
Yeah. Interesting. I heard a presentation from faculty last year at some point. Had spent years building the coding to basically create a chatbot, like an agent in their course, LMS, that has all that information in there and would basically respond to students as if it was him, the instructor, so that students could get questions answered at like 2 a.m. They need a question about this particular assignment, and this tool was able to do that. Thinking, that's a lot of work, but he was designing it, the intent. Okay, I guess I got muted. So anyway, yeah, it's capability. That's the kind of capability that's going to continue to develop, and we're going to have the opportunity to use that at some point. And so, yeah, it's kind of like early days of the web. If you were around for those, remember what that was like? HTML coding and WYSIWYG editors, and now WordPress doing courses. Oh my gosh. That took, I don't know, 20 years of development or 15 years of development to get to that point. But now, within 2 or 3 years, it's going to be pretty amazing. We have lots of questions we're going to have to answer. It is going to
Dr.
affect all of us, yeah.
Dr. Beatty, do you find any resistance from the students using this GPT?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good question. I do. And sometimes it's a little surprising for me, but they have really good rational arguments. And some of them are like, the environmental impacts of what we're doing with generative AI, the way it is right now, they're just like aghast at what's going on. And they see it as they drive through the desert or whatever it happens to be. And so it's, I'm not going to use generative AI, just not going to do it. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, professionally speaking, you're probably going to have to do this at some point, but you're not, this is not the role. This is in the classroom environment. So whenever I am suggesting a generative AI tool that they're using for a particular reason, I also let them know that if you don't want to use generative AI, either here's the alternative or contact me and we'll come up with an alternative for you to essentially get the same value out of it. Where I see this most commonly is when I give them, like when I do a breakout in class, the asynchronous students know, and I let them know in the recording language and transcript, et cetera, you're expected to be part of this breakout. Either you can do it 2 ways here, use one of these breakout tools and show your output as part of the debrief document, or you just, here's what we're talking about. You kind of talk about this on your own, essentially, go through your own thinking about this and then add your comments to what we've already created. So there's 2 different paths. And the point is not to get a specific kind of output. The point is to get them to think through what it is we're talking about as a topic. And so that outcome is being met, whether they do it with a GPT tool or they just do it individually, or they do it in the live class with 2 or 3 other people. Different experiences, but essentially the same outcomes being met. And it's not the kind of discussion, it was a breakout discussion. So you're not developing any understanding that is the only way you're going to develop that understanding, right? They're just kind of enhancing what they know, and they're shifting based on the conversations. And that's the point.
Derek, do you have anything?
I think it's been just a fascinating discussion. Thank you, Brian. This is just absolutely great. The chat is exploding with questions, and this is just a discussion that's going to be continued. You're absolutely right. As ChatGPT and other tools evolve, we are going to have even more questions as to teacher role, student role, how we interact,
That's right.
happens, how we stay true to learning.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, so I would encourage you to experiment as much as you're willing to, and then when you find something that's really working cool, or maybe that doesn't work, and it's like blows up, share that with others. Let people know.
Yeah.
It's going to find ways to do that.
Yep. So thank you very much for your time, and let me just go ahead and stop the recording.